Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We're here with the one and only Benjamin C. George, Mr. Wizard. He's an author, an entrepreneur. He is a man who wears many different hats, and we're going to have an interesting conversation today. Benjamin C. George, before we get started, what's been going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing all right, brother. Just getting out of the sick woods and getting back to real life, and trying to get a whole bunch of stuff worked out for some businesses down in doing some manufacturing down in Mexico, which is interesting. So, yeah, just been busy doing that, getting Terra Libre project stuff going, and slacking on a podcast. How are you doing, man?
Man, you got a lot on your plate. Yeah, I got a few irons in the fire myself, and it's interesting to first off, I think I'm really thankful that for both of us to be able to have a few things going on in the world why it's so chaotic. And you were talking about you being sick. I just got sick. What have you heard any new ideas about this world of COVID going on? We had the WEF and Davos talking about a new type of sickness that might be going around, or what's new on that front? Have you heard anything?
Well, I mean, I don't know the veracity of it, but did you see that Project Veritas video?
Man, the Project Veritas video was amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Now that guy could be lying, like he said, he could just be a chump. But at the same time, they tried to scrub everything, but they didn't disacknowledge that he worked for him.
Right.
So, it's kind of an interesting thing. And if they're what did he call it?
Directed evolution.
Directed evolution. Now, if that's the game that's being played, which I think there's a fair decent amount of evidence to suggest that there has been. I mean, we've been dinking around with viruses and bacteria and stuff for the past probably 80 years now as a species, if not longer.
Right.
So, for us to just all of a sudden put that away and shelve it and stop, I don't think is probably the most logical assumption. So, yeah, I think, we're pushing the boundaries of, it's one thing to, kind of mess around with antibiotics and things like that, where you discover they have an effect in the human body. When you start pushing like genetic buttons where you have no idea of the downstream consequences, the cross, what happens with the epigenome and what happens with, when you take a couple generations of this and fast forward it through reproduction, we're playing with fire quite literally. And I think, I think we're still seeing the effects of that. I mean, you have this COVID virus that some epidemiologists say, the rate of mutation that this thing goes through is just kind of unlike anything else that we've really ever encountered. We're talking like, something like a flu or a cold has like a yearly kind of year over year, it kind of mutates a little bit based upon environment and all that stuff. This thing is mutated, over 30, 40 times at this point in 2.5 years.
Yeah. I think what we saw in that Pfizer video was the most honest statement to ever come from the pharmaceutical industry in the history of media. Right? Like,
not far off. Yeah.
Yeah, that's as clear as it gets. If you want to know what's happening at Pfizer, if you want to know what's happening in the pharmaceutical industry, just watch that Project Veritas video. And it got me thinking, maybe this whole sort of pandemic was in fact directed evolution. We in the beginning we heard quite a bit about the jab or the shots being a sort of gene therapy, and maybe that is exactly what this is directed evolution. Maybe there is a process involved where they want everyone to be getting this shot. And I've heard some interesting rumors, and this is all speculation. Of course, I'm not a doctor or anything like that. This is just me putting on my tinfoil hat, saying what I think. But there was some sort of people on the underground saying that the officials would love to see Medicare, Medicaid, and all healthcare become kind of a subscription service. And what better way for a subscription service than to have to get a shot every 6 months, every 4 months, or at a certain age, you got to get it twice a month. You you could see the sinister level of profits kind of sinking into the world of business and
Oh
especially
yeah.
pharmaceuticals trying to take things over. But yeah, directed evolution, it's an interesting thing, and you're right. There has been an incredible amount of you know the virus just changing and modifying itself so many times. It's a fascinating time to be alive. What do you see happening on the horizon with the whole directed evolution and the pharmaceutical industries and the future of COVID?
Well, I think that's a huge topic for one, but I think it was the head of Pfizer who last. I don't think it was this most recent Davos, but it was the most recent World Economic Forum thing. They were talking about a new technology that will send a signal essentially when it's taken.
Mm,
So, and they cited, mass compliance was the term that he used, I think, which is kind of weird when you're using the word compliance and talking about medicine, right? Usually
yeah.
medicine, if it actually is medicine, people are more than happy to comply with fixing themselves. But yet you have to use the term mass compliance in conjunction with something that's supposed to help somebody. I don't know. Seems a bit shady in my book, but the world's a
Yeah.
bit shady in my book these days.
Yeah, it really is. It's sometimes it makes me wonder, has it always been this shady and we've just not had the window like the internet to look in and see the machine, and now all of a sudden we have this window we can look in? Or is it
I think it
progressively
has.
getting, you think it's always been this way?
I think it has. By and more, by and large, more or less. I think, yeah, it's just the advent of the internet and us having the ability to share information in mass. That all of a sudden we can look behind a few of the bookcases and see the skeletons
Yeah.
in the closet.
Yeah, it's true. I was reading up on a book the other day, just briefly, called Two Brothers and Their Secret World War, and it was about the Dulles brothers,
Hmm.
John and Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, and the other one was in the State Department. And at that point in time, like, that's what Kennedy was going to break up. He wanted to break into 1,000 pieces the CIA. And that book gets onto the topic of, this was pretty much the takeover of the America as we know it. It went from being a nation of free people and the CIA being an agent for old money families in Europe, for like the corporations, United Fruit Company, Wall Street,
Mhm.
all the richest people in the world were now able to pay the CIA to use the America machine however they see fit, and they bid it out to the highest bidder. And
Mhm.
I don't know if that's exactly what's happening, but if you look at it through that lens, that's sure what it seems like. It seems to me that, and it's unfortunate. I'm sure that there's awesome people at the CIA, the FBI, but it does seem as if those three-letter agencies have been just using the United States military, the industrial power of it, and the people to move on whatever parts of the world. If you have enough money, you hire the CIA. The CIA makes America do whatever you want it to do. It's kind of a sinister thing.
Indeed, and when you don't have transparent accounting for something like that, when they can't come up with how much money they actually don't know that
Yeah.
they have, type idea, right? The Defense Department for a couple times now has come back and said, yeah, we can't find a couple $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Not a small amount of money,
Did you look
but
under the
we
couch?
can't find it at all. It's like $1 trillion, really. You can't find a couple $1 trillion. Yeah, so when you set up these clandestine alphabet agencies that are not beholden to taxpayers, to Congress, to anybody really, they're beholden to their own bureaucracy. Yeah, you know talk about a recipe for corruption.
Yeah. Yeah. You add three parts, um, non-government organizations. You put in a dash of secret societies. You mix it up in a big pot called the Ukraine.
Ah, indeed.
What
Yeah,
a
no, it's
disaster.
yeah, and then the more you look into it too, the more you're like, really, that happened. You have people like Bush Senior was the head of the thing, and the correlation with all the things that happened from him and degenerated on down, and like the whole cocaine trade. The whole reason that existed was because the CIA was using it as a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
Fund all their black book projects. And then let alone, you get into Freedom of Information Act stuff like MK Ultras and stuff like that.
Whoa.
And then it's like, what the hell's actually going on? And I think by and large, the common individual, even with the advent of the internet, even with
Yeah.
all this stuff, has pretty much zero clue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that set it off for me was as I got older and I started hearing about George Bush Sr., who probably had an IQ of like 200. That guy was really smart. But what really tipped me off is what they kept calling him Poppy Bush. Hey, this is Poppy Bush. And I'm like, dude, he was the guy that kind of got us in Afghanistan. What's in Afghanistan? Heroin. What's heroin made out of? Poppy. He's
Mm-hmm.
Poppy Bush. Like that's his code name. Oh shit, it all makes sense. He's Poppy Bush. You know what I mean? Like it's this
Mm-hmm.
inside joke about this guy whose name just happens to match the drug trade that's been going on since the since the British started selling the heroin to the Chinese back in the
Opium.
day.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like there's a direct line there, and all of a sudden once you see the matrix like take shape a little bit, it's pretty hard to it's like one of those pictures where like if you squint at it, it becomes a 3D thing. So when you
Mm-hmm.
walk by, it's there. You just have to take time to kind of squint your eyes and look at it and you can see it. Like that's how I look at least the geopolitical landscape on some level. And I'm nowhere near an analyst or anything like that. But I think that you don't have to be. I think that you can just be someone that reads, that has their eyes open, maybe does a little mushrooms here and there. But I think you can begin to see the world taking shape. And if you can see the world the way it is instead of the way you want it to be, it can be sobering, but I think you can get a better understanding of where you live.
Right. And I think you create a much more complete mental model of how this all works. You start looking at these
Right.
pieces of evidence, and it's funny because a lot of people still call a lot of this stuff conspiracy theory.
Right.
Yet, like, you do have Freedom of Information Act that, these, heavily redacted files, but pretty clear and implicit upon what they've been up to, how they've operated. And it's definitely been not just overseas things, it's been propaganda right here in the United States too, and all sorts of experimentation in the United States. And then, I think once you start to line up these pieces of evidence, all of a sudden, you're constantly wearing a tinfoil hat, but you can see the forest through the trees. You start to see the structure of the thing. And then, when you start to align, like, well, why would somebody do that? And then you look at, all the downstream consequences that have happened from these things. And you go, oh, well, follow the dollar makes a lot of
Right.
sense. And it seems to tie these all together in a pretty nice little bow. And it's a deplorable thing, but at the same time, I don't think it's been anything new under the sun. I think this has been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, and that's what leads to the level of just pure narcissism or pure confidence. I don't think it's maybe it's confidence. It's the people that are in positions of authority. They don't really worry too much about the people on the bottom because they've just defiled them for so long. And on some level, you're like, you could probably see how they get to a point where they're like, these people on the bottom are just dumb and they're stupid and they don't matter. We can kill them all because they're just so replaceable. And you start hearing terms like useless eaters, and it's in some ways to me like I try to think of ways in which you could wake up the people on the bottom to revolt against the people on the top. I don't know if that's the answer, but when I look and I see just this level of distraction that's plastered all over television, it's plastered all over magazines, it's all over talk radio. It might as well be like that old movie They Live, where they just have signs up, but these signs would say hate each other, kill, hate, fight, sex, like all these things to distract you from the fact that there's a ruling class that's just extracting all the wealth from you, and they're not going to stop. It's so crazy
Yeah.
to me. What do you think we go from here? Or do you see signs on the horizon of us finding ways to make life better, or is tech working for us, or what do you think?
Well, I think, tech is that double-edged sword.
Right.
And both those edges can cut deeply. yeah, it could work for us, but it gets so quickly co-opted
Yeah.
that it works against us just as fast. And the sad part is even if you could all of a sudden wake everybody up on the bottom, let's just say you could snap your fingers and have it done. Everybody eats the red pill, right? Uh, you still end up in an untenable situation where people are an average of $100,000 in debt. Where are you going to connect with people? Where are you going to have congregations of people? All of these things are controlled processes. You can't just go out there and, even if everybody was red pilled overnight, can't go out there and start a revolution. There's just not enough of a system to do so. Yeah, you might be able to communicate. Yeah, you can have some podcasts and things like that. But at the end of the day, people still need to eat. People still have families. People still have all of these responsibilities that they've entombed themselves in society. And that doesn't go away overnight, even if you could wake people up. So it becomes a very interesting situation. But I do think we're seeing kind of the old system, this just completely resource dominant system, start to fracture at scale. And I think through those fractures and through those cracks, there is opportunity and there is hope. And I think over the next, it's not going to be quick. I think it probably won't even be for the next few years before we start to actually see real world solutions that start to counter these types of what we're seeing in the world today. And that's also predicated on if the world doesn't dive itself into a world war, which is a hell of a good distraction too, right? Don't look at us. Guess what?
Yep. Yep. Let's go and find till that damn war happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like, when all else fails, they take you to war. And, you could argue that the monetary system has failed. You could argue that the pension system has failed. You could argue that the Wall Street structure, the political structure, and the education structure are all fractured and beginning to fail. And no one wants to be left holding the bag. So, let's send some tanks, let's send some planes over to Ukraine and fight Russia to the last European.
Right. And it's also really interesting because all these things have failed, right? Yet I just read yesterday Exxon made something like 56 billion some dollars in profits. They're not doing too bad. They've had 9 out of 10 of the last quarters have been record growth for them. Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure 9 out of the 10 last quarters have been, completely debilitating to the average individual. When do these things get to such a degree where, you just push enough people over the edge? I think we've definitely seen it in history, right? But, for it to happen in modern times almost feels fantastical.
Yeah. And as it makes me think that there's clearly some complexity there. There's a lot of moving parts. And, on one hand, I'm thinking like, if I'm in a boardroom with Exxon, then I'm high-fiving everybody. Like, this is fantastic. We're doing better than we've ever done. Industrial board at Skunk Works or Boeing or something like that, or whatever military industrial Raytheon. You're high-fiving. You're like, we got to figure out how to keep this war going, man. We're crushing it. And then on some levels, in a city in, I don't know, in Flint, Michigan, you're a city council is trying to figure out how to get clean drinking water. And I'm sure that everything's happening all at once in different parts right there. And to your point about, it's happened in history, I guess it's slow at first until all at once. And if you're one entity, if you're Exxon, you're like, look, man, we are not going to push the world over the precipice. It's going to be somebody else. It's always going to be somebody else. But all these things slowly working together, just slowly consuming everything, there's a real chance it could do that. On some level, I think that. So that's what I think on one level is like, yeah, it is possible to move towards that doomsday scenario. And on another level, I'm wondering if, maybe this is part of the human condition. Maybe we have to get so bad before we change. Maybe this is where creativity happens. And I think that there's been studies and writers who said that, look, warfare is the crowning achievement of mankind. We must get into incredible wars. Then we can create the technology we need to get out of it. And I think on some level, there's probably people out there that are praying that we get as close as we can to the precipice, because that's when you see the beauty of the human condition. I know that's twisted, but what do you think to that point of we must fight each other in order to build things? I know that sounds crazy, but I think there's a there. What do you think?
Well, I think historically speaking, there's a great precedent for that. I mean, war has been the innovator of new technology since as long as we've had recorded history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think there's also some other side roads there, like, for instance, like a space program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
one could argue that that was also, a response to a wartime process too. So, but at the same time, that gave us that gave us the microchip, gave us a lot of different things. But I would think, by and large, for the most part, war has defined the human race in terms of our technological advancement, at least in this iteration of what we call humanity. And yeah, I don't want the world to go to war for sure, but at this point, I think we're seeing just the general breakdown of humanity and uh, at social scales, at cultural scales, and what it can actually accept with what we have instituted in the world today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, if I were just to do a 180, and sometimes I think it's a good idea to take your own idea of what's happening, and then just flip it on its head. So sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
find myself like, you know what? We should go to war. We should just go and murder everybody. Like, let's just go out and conquer and see what happens. Like, and when I start thinking like that, I think to myself, like, well, why don't we just join with Russia? Why don't we just join with Russia and just take over the entire world and take that route? If we're going to go to war, and I think we could get the multinational. Well, I think we could get a large number of at least American multinational corporations. I think we could get some oligarchs on board. I know we could get the defense contractors on board. Like, why don't we rally it up, guys? Like, let's get all the Americans and get all the Russians and just conquer the world. Let's take out everybody and put up just our flags. Let's just go and destroy and steal everything. Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And let's get the American people behind it. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it that way. Like, why can't we do it that way?
I think it's in part because there's only so much capacity for war at an individual level. I think at the individual level, most people are just genuinely, they want good things for their family and their loved ones, and they want to be left alone, and they want to, explore the things they want to explore and live a peaceful life, by and large. So to rally those people into a fervor that says, yeah, let's just go fucking kill everybody is a very large uphill battle. And I think has historically always been a very large uphill battle. And that's why we've always had things like, religious entities and, all these other things that kind of act as the bulwarks for these, have to talk about eternal damnation and all of these other things in order to get people enough skin in the game that they actually want to play and participate. That some sort of existential threat has to be there. But yeah, I mean, what are you pussyfooting around for? Why don't you just go do it?
I agree. I was just playing devil's advocate because I mean, I know it's like, to anybody listening, like, I don't really mean we should do that, but just do it as a thought experiment. Like, think about it. Like, if we're going to go and just take over little spots here and there, like, if you do this thought experiment, I think it will get you to a point of how corrupt things are. Like, what is the strategic benefit of potentially causing a nuclear war over a very small place in Europe called the Ukraine? There's not really any sort of grand awesomeness that comes from the United States by the people, but there is an incredible amount of resources that are right there in the Ukraine. Like, that's where all the oil pipelines kind of merge, like a shift station. There's tons. It's like the breadbasket of Europe. If you want to control the world's island, you got to control that area. When you're fighting Russia, you're weakening China. And so from a geopolitical strategy, it kind of makes sense if you start looking at it from that angle. But
Mhm.
there's pretty much no real benefit for the man or woman or the child that live in the United States. And so that's where we have to have a gun pointed to our head. Look, these guys are they're nuclear and they're going to kill all of you. They hate you. It's Russia's fault. They're going to murder you. It's always this invisible enemy. COVID, man,
Mhm.
you're all going to die from COVID. No, it's the Russians. They're going to kill you. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's those terrorists over there in the Middle East. Watch out for those guys. If you
Mhm.
just peel back the curtain, it's some guy with a megaphone yelling at you like, be afraid, be scared. And it's the 5 minutes of fear in 1984, or the five
Mhm.
minutes of hate that they're trying to just feed you all the time. And the truth is, we're probably not at all in danger one bit. It's just that the people in positions of authority need a constant state of emergency to push through the policies to make them wealthy.
Well, it's not just the policies too,
Right.
right? It's we got to get rid of, what, over $100 billion worth of old shit that was just hanging
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
And now we get to spend hundreds of more billions of dollars to replace that old shit. There's a lot of wheels that get greased in this process. And
Yeah.
and on all sides too, right? Russia
Sure.
was in a similar position. You know, they've had aging equipment since the Soviet Union that is just kind of like it's use it or lose it type idea. And this, war has always been a great generator of national economy. um
Yeah.
and there's reasons for that. Is all of a sudden you need the iron, you need the copper, you need the manufacturing, you need the computer chips, you need all of the semiconductor processes, not just for consumption but for a war effort. And you know like you said, you covered a lot of what Ukraine has. The other thing that they have a lot of is neon. You don't make semiconductors, you don't have computer chips without neon. you know from a strategic point of view, it's kind of like the linchpin between Europe and Asia and the manufacturing center of the world in China, which
Yeah.
is, since we're talking geopolitics here, that's an interesting thing. I think the Chinese system is to the point where a lot of their previous policies are now coming home to roost. Um, so the one child policy for all of those years is now to the point where all of those people are to the age of actually like reinforcing the demographics of the country. And there's just a significant lack of women, there's a significant lack of families being produced, number of children. And they've actually lied about their economic, I guess, what they've actually accomplished versus in reality what was happening. They got a lot of big real estate developments. They got a lot of big financial investment stuff. That's all kind of, defaulting because it was all kind of just this propped up crony capitalism type bullshit. So they're at an economic point and a demographic point where if they don't find some way to expand relatively soon, they're going to implode. And I think that's where you see the movement towards this whole BRICS thing happening.
Hmm.
They're trying to push this timeline faster. And I think from the West perspective, yeah, they're pretty well aware of what that game is. And I think this, the whole idea behind propping up the Ukraine is to make sure that that game can't take the next steps.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at it from the perspective of the great game, and you see the resources on the board, you see the players on the board, and there's so many moving parts out there. I spoke to a guy the other day who was telling me, in his opinion, he believed that the the C-19 outbreak was a form of economic warfare put out by the CCP. Like, look, if we're going down, we're taking everybody with us, and release this sort of, you know, plague on the world. And it is interesting to think about the different policies that the CCP has. I'm curious to get your opinion. The same guy I was talking to, really great guy and fun to talk to, he had mentioned the way in which China is moving through the different continents, and giving aid to some of the third world countries the same way the IMF would. Only they're not putting a lot of restrictions on their money, or maybe not the same restrictions. It seems to me that the IMF and the Chinese model is to go to a country that's indebted, give them the money, or build them a port that they'll never be able to pay back, and then seize that land when they can't pay it back. It seems like black cat, white cat, like they both catch mice. And so, you know, it's just weird to me. Like, do you see it that way, or do you see it differently? This guy was trying to tell me, well, when we do it, you know, we put restrictions, like you got to treat people well. And, you know, I don't know if I agree with that. I think that it's just a different bank, that they're both trying to seize your property. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think there's how we do it and how they do it. I think there's just a way to do it. And in that way, I mean, you can put little bows on it however you like. Like, for instance, you know, personal experience, when I was traveling, I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. Costa Rica was this very lean country that, you know, people were always walking and, always making homemade food and all of this. All of a sudden, a stadium gets donated by China, and then a bridge, and then helicopters for the police department, cars for the police department. Fast forward another year or two of this effort, and then Costa Rica signs a free trade agreement with China. Now there's a Chinatown in downtown San Jose in Costa Rica. Now there's Chinese fishing vessels off the coast, fishing up the beautiful waters of Costa Rica and just raping the seas, longlining and shipping it all back to China. Every single grocery store, hardware store, everything that used to be these little mom and pop shops are now operated by Chinese nationals. And mom and pop shops in Costa Rica can no longer compete, because all of the stuff that these people are getting is coming across through this free trade agreement. And they obviously have all the sourcing already taken care of, because it's all, you know, a family venture essentially. Right. And all of a sudden you just take out a vast swath of the small and medium businesses in a country. I saw this happen in Ecuador. I saw it happen in Peru. I saw it happen in Costa Rica. And, you know, they're doing the similar things in Africa with a lot of different African countries. So their game is slightly different. You know, they use it as more of kind of like a grassroots type idea, whereas the IMF comes in and is more of a top down, you know, thing. But the end effect is the same, which is the people who actually live there have less and less control over their resources and the future of their economy. And it kind of just gets wrapped up into this kind of global agenda, this global game of risk.
Yeah. Do you see, I was listening to another geopolitical analyst, and he was telling me he had a different idea. And his idea was that, you know, what we see in our country is a lot of propaganda against the European idea of a multipolar world. And he's in his words, he was saying that what we're looking at is a unipolar world. The United States runs the world, versus a multipolar world, where it's a basket of countries that are coming together to try and make the world more effective and efficient. And in some ways, he was really eloquent in the way he explained it. And he talked about how, you know, I think he said it was, I could be butchering it, maybe Kennedy or something, like they had these grand plans to connect the world. And he pointed to the you could go and look, like there was a railway that was going to go up the coast through Alaska, join to Russia. We're going to be able to export stuff through. They even started on building some of the infrastructure. And then that was squashed when, you know, the new administrations came in and like, no, we're going to take more of an adversarial role. We don't want to do that. We want to take things over and us own it, rather than working together and have everybody do it. And the way he explained what's happening now is that you're beginning to see the world take a more cooperative approach. And you're seeing the new Silk Road come in. And he explained the East Asian nations as wanting to take part in an economy that they have been, you know, pushed out of. And the same thing with Russia, been pushed out of, and Iran's been pushed out of. So there's these countries that want to come together, that want to cooperate, that don't want to be part of a dollar hegemony where there's no way they can win, and all that's exported is inflation to them. And so
Mm-hmm.
his argument was pretty interesting, and on some levels I can see that, but on the longer game, maybe I'm just propagandized because I live in the U.S. and I fall victim to the rhetoric. However, I'm just curious. Do you see a multipolar world, if it were to come into fruition, would that be better for the people in the United States?
Given how much hate's been fostered by the United States over the past few generations, I don't know that it would be better for the common individual. I also disagree that it's all this good faith interest in having a multipolar world. You have to look at the players on the board game and what they claimed and what they've stated that they want. Like for instance, China. China has a one world China policy. They've stated it many times over. They want to rule everything. They want to be the uniparty of the entire world. Other people like in Iran, and they have religious leanings that would never allow them to play nice for long periods of time at scale, as do many countries. Right. The only thing that's kind of really held that at bay is the fact that there is a big bad United States out there who will come and drop some bombs. And the willingness of that to happen from the United States people has diminished so much over the years that now I think we're seeing, just a completely different game unfold, because now the United States Navy isn't going to come rolling into every port. Now you're going to get shipments of weapons and missiles and stuff. Sure, they might have been manufactured by the United States, but you don't have that. You don't have that strong arm that's coming in to, pull people apart and say, you over here, you over here. Now, you could make arguments that there's better and worse aspects of that, but I think we're definitely seeing the hegemony of the United States as, the world's big brother, go away for multiple different reasons. Now, I don't think that it's all good faith and pats on the back when what happens next, because what happens next is now you have people who are willing to be bad actors in the game, willing to make, completely anti-ethical decisions, unmoral decisions in order to simply win.
Yeah.
Whereas we were always kind of propped up by some form of morality, even though, like we were talking to CIA, you could make arguments against that too. However, there was some overarching morality and ethics to how we operated in the game of this world game. And I think the people who want to compete at that scale, they don't have that same type of centralized backbone, of ethical backbone.
Yeah,
which
it's a great point.
which means bad things for people.
Yeah, if you pull on that thread, you could flesh it out a little bit more. Like if we're, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to see three theaters of war begin to shape up, and you have the Ukraine, potentially Taiwan, and then Iran and Israel happening, all of which the U.S. is sworn to brotherhood with. These, whether it's NATO or Israel or Taiwan, we're over here like, look, we're coming to save you if something happens. All the while, these three battlefronts are opening up. We have our own politicians that are just running in the back and stealing all the silverware and like, yeah, dude, look at this. I'm going to bump this up. Hey, Jerome Powell, can you keep rates low for me, buddy? Oh, can I borrow $1 trillion and park it at your place and just make 5-6% while I burn all my employees? Can I do that? Oh, yeah, no problem, man. And so you could even argue that that's a fourth theater of war. You have these financial interests, these Wall Street bros, these tech bros, or these political bros that are just raping the people through the top over here. And then, a house divided can't stand. So, if I was an analyst, or if I was someone in China, or if I was someone in Iran, and all those countries are talking to each other, like, yeah, look, let US send their Abrams over here. Perfect. You send your NATO tanks over here. As soon as you get in there, you broke the rules. Yeah, why don't you send your troops over there? Send all your stuff over. And we know that China plays the long game. we've already seen Israel attack using
Iran.
drones in Iran, right? So all it takes is for like a coordinated effort. And let's not kid ourselves that China doesn't own a large number of politicians. So they could operate on four fronts. Russia sucks in America. Yeah, send all your money over. Your people hate you already. Yeah, keep sending your stuff. And they're just feeding the neocons, like giving them little tidbits. You got a Victoria Nuland, the oil companies, just pushing all the politicians to send more stuff. So we do. We're sending trillions over there. Taiwan is just sitting over here like a duck. China's just slowly waiting. They're moving ships. Like if you look at the way in which China has moved their ships, you could argue there's a blockade right there ready to happen. So, can we fight on three fronts? And if I was those three countries, they're all coordinating. All it takes is for Iran to strike Israel. And I think it's game over, because as soon as that happens, Israel, the chain comes off Israel. They start attacking. Lord knows what Saudi Arabia does. China moves in, like it's just a perfect storm waiting to happen. And it seems to me that the United States it has to get to a point where it makes a decision. Are you going to take care of your people? Are you going to be a nation? Or are you going to kowtow to the very multinational corporations that run you? Like we have to make a decision as a country.
We sold out. Citizens United, man.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And I think we sold out probably a little bit before that, but that was definitely one of the death nails in terms of is the United States going to live on as an experiment of a nation for too much longer? And when we just kind of bowed down to that blatant corruption, I mean, we essentially set ourselves up as the sacrificial lamb for all of these things. The only thing that kind of kept it all, still under what we considered the United States was the petrodollar.
Yeah.
And now you have BRICS, which is this new alignment with China, Brazil, even Saudi Arabia is now in talks to join BRICS, right? You have, so all of basically the oil interests in the world, which the United States isn't any schlub when it comes to the amount of oil that we have access to. We just don't have the will to actually go drill it or the strategic need to go do so. But, we could quickly become, by far the world's largest oil producer overnight to compete against this. So, yeah, when you factor in all these things, I think we're in a very precarious position in terms of the United States, us. And yeah, I think, we're looking at one of those situations where, it's almost like you're just waiting for the Franz Ferdinand for World War III to start.
It's a good point. If we were at the track and we were betting on the next Franz Ferdinand, like who are your top three Franz Ferdinand bets?
Oh, I think you actually nailed one of them. I think Israel's one of them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a Franz Ferdinand assassination type thing, but it could very well be like an assassination of a Netanyahu or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, that guy's definitely doesn't have a lot of love in the world, right? But I think Franz Ferdinand is just one of those kind of false flags things too that, we're led to believe that was the cascade of events, but the cascade of events had already started at the tail end of World War I.
Yeah,
that was just a culmination of events brewing to such a point where it was now it's a fire, and that fire had to go somewhere. And Franz Ferdinand was a scapegoat for that, I guess you could say. But I think, the fire's been brewing since World War II. Things didn't really get settled. And I think, you could even make the argument that it's been brewing since the Cold War as well. But I think World War II is probably a bit more applicable if you look at all of the series of events. But yeah, this is, I think, all these wars have been kind of to determine who controls those resources going forward, right? And that question has yet to be settled. So I think in terms of the way that humans operate societally, That question has to be answered.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up World War II. You know, when I think of the world wars, I think of especially World War II. I start thinking like, wow, the Nazis were really good at making a lot of money when they just went into hyperinflation. You know, like how do they get all this money? And you're like, oh, I see, the banks bankrolled them. Oh, wait a minute, what was that headline about BlackRock meets with Zelensky to rebuild to rebuild the Ukraine? Like, oh, they've already figured out who's getting the contracts to rebuild all the stuff that Russia's killing. I wonder if
Yep.
Russia gets a cut back from that, or I wonder what's happening in the back room. But either way, it looks like Vanguard and it looks like BlackRock have the contracts to rebuild it. Now, I bet you there's some Chinese developers that are pretty pissed off that they're not getting a cut of that. And so
Oh yeah.
all of a sudden you start seeing the finance behind the war. And that to me is a spot where there can be the Franz Ferdinand flashpoint is these giant multinational banking industries fighting over the red meat that's left there. And there's tons for everybody, but they want it all. So they're willing to
Mm-hmm.
fight and just, flood the country with money and weapons and arms. And, all it takes is that one flashpoint for, no one wants there to be a nuclear war, but there's somebody like a John Bolton or a Victoria Nuland that's like, look, man, we can recover from a first strike. Let's just throw this thing. Let's teach these guys a lesson, and
Well, I would
it's
like to
yeah.
think. I would like to think that there's not anybody out there who wants a nuclear war, but I have a feeling that there probably is a few.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird sort of way, I could see the logic behind it. Like, look, the world is in such a mess. If we had a limited nuclear strike, it would wake the world up, and we would become loving people once again. Like, I could see that twisted logic happen.
That is twisted for sure. But no, I don't disagree with you. I could definitely see people rationalizing that behavior. It's like again, existential threats, right?
Right?
Once that existential threat rears its ugly head, all of a sudden you will have a whole bunch of people come together and say, no, we're going to do it this way. The thing is I think there's a lot of factors in there too. I mean, how much does it cost to maintain these thousands of nuclear weapons that we have, right? They're all getting aged too. They're all
Yeah.
made in 1970s, right? You know, half these things probably wouldn't even fly if the button was pushed,
Yeah.
let alone actually detonate. So I think there's a lot of factors in there. It's kind of the same principle of us sending all our old arms over to the Ukraine to reflush through that system. Why wouldn't the same logic apply at the nuclear level and all of that infrastructure?
Yeah.
To the people who are
yeah.
playing the game, right?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was listening to some people the other day and they were talking about, the Biden crime family. And it's really no different than the Trump crime family or the Clinton crime family or the Obama crime family, or the Putin crime family or the Xi Jinping crime family. Like if you look at the world as a set of gangster, a mob families, like it makes much more sense. And if you continue to hold that idea in your head, I want people to try to hold that idea of the people that rule us as mob warring families. And as you're thinking about that, take that idea and just plug that idea into the movie Goodfellas, where Paulie buys the restaurant. For those that don't know, there's this really nice restaurant, and this Italian guy. It's beautiful. It's got the scenery, the ambiance, the food. It's beautiful. Only there's this one gangster played by Joe Pesci that goes in there, and he's a total punk. He goes in there, he runs up the bill, runs up thousands of dollars, never pays it, threatens the owner. So the owner goes to the mob boss and says, look, hey, you're Gambino guy over here. He runs everything up. Why don't you become a partner with me? And then that guy will pay his bills. And the guy's like, I don't know you. I don't know nothing about it. So the mob boss says, okay, I'll do it. He ends up taking over the restaurant. They run it into the ground. They get as many credit cards as they can. They take out a second, a third, a fourth from the restaurant. They take all the money, soak it all out. And then when there's nothing left, they set it on fire. And it's really no different than what's happened to our countries. Whether you're Russia, maybe Russia might be a little bit different, but it seems to me in the United States where I live, that's what's happened. We've come in, We've run everything up. We've run the credit cards. We've completely maxed them out. We're taking out a second, a third on all the American people. You're seeing the tech companies cut their jobs. Like all of a sudden, we're getting to this point where the next move is you burn it down and collect the insurance money. And it just seems to me like that is, and if you want to look at another scale, like that's what happened in Russia, right? Like we beat Russia. I don't know if we beat them, but there was some economic warfare. They collapsed. All the oligarchs came in. They bought up for everything for pennies on the dollar. Putin comes in, kicks out some of them. And that's why he's so loved over there. If we can see that model happen, you could argue that that's something called creative destruction. It's a way to redistribute the resources once there's been some monopolies. And why wouldn't it happen here? Like, there's no excuse why that wouldn't happen here. That's a business model. And there's so much money to be made on that model. And you can already see it kind of happening. The United States has now gone from a republic and a democratic republic to somewhat of an oligarch. Like, Bill Gates owns the most land. Who do we look to for leadership? We look to Elon Musk. He's a billionaire. How about the guy from Oracle? He's a billionaire. How about Jeff Bezos? He's a billionaire. Like, we're starting to look at oligarchs as the only people that can do things. And that looks a lot like Russia before it collapsed.
Well, and it's also very reminiscent of the history of humanity. I mean, you go back to monarchies. You go back even before the monarchies. You've always had the aristocracy that has always played this. If they're not directly oligarchs, they're supporting organized crime and mobs and gangs and all of these other things. We seem to be stuck in a recurrent model of how to do things, and for the people who make a lot of money, it's a good system, right? Like, you're winning a lot. It just so happens that that's, a fraction of a percent of the total people on the planet. And occasionally that bill comes home, instead of them being able to burn down, and get the insurance money, they catch all those guys in the act before they're about to burn it down, and they string them all up. And that's happened before in society too.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, how far you can push modern society with all of this mass communication that we have. Because I think we're probably going to see it within our lifetimes.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could see some of the data that was collected when there was COVID, and you got to see how many people complied with laws, what genders complied, what races complied, what age groups complied, what propaganda was effective, how much were we able to destroy housing? On what level did we hurt education? And what are the results? Like, there's so much knowledge that was gained during this process. And to think that knowledge won't be used against the people the next time it happens, right? Like, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that, the rhetoric about the United States sending money to Ukraine coincides with the grounding of planes, the crashing of Wall Street. Like, all these things have happened in the last month and a half. And it coincides with all the rhetoric that's been happening in Ukraine. It's almost as if it's tit for tat. Hey, the U.S. is sending this stuff over there. Hey, guess what? All our planes are grounded for the first time since 9/11. Hey, the stock market can't open. Like, those are attacks. Like, that is a tit for tat attack against the United States. That is people testing our infrastructure. That's like the people that do pen testing, right? I mean, I don't know that, but that's my opinion.
Well, perhaps, and we talked about it before too. It's,
right.
You have an aging infrastructure of all this stuff. Like, that whole FAA thing was apparently, so they claim, a corrupted file. And you have this old archaic system running to the point where there's no redundancy in it. And that a single file corrupts itself and can ground the entire fleet of domestic travel. Like, wow, where's the money to upgrade that system? How much money does the FAA get? I'm sure they've gotten enough to build a new system. I'm pretty damn sure of that. But yet it all gets filtered away in corrupt contracts and all these other things. It's the stepbrother, it's all this stuff. And I see it at the local city level here in Colorado Springs all the time. I mean, it's just corrupt bullshit. I think It was a couple years back. The police department got $300,000 to make a new website, essentially, with some services attached to it. The person who ends up getting a contract was uh, the stepbrother of the local city council head city councilman, right? And all the money ends up disappearing. The website doesn't actually end up changing all that much. All the services promised don't happen, and then it eventually just gets scrapped with no sort of inquiry or anything like that. But $300,000 is gone, right, of taxpayer money. And I think that happens just rampantly, and I think it happens at federal level even more so. Like, what was it? It was Obama's somebody related to Obama got the contract for all of that, the Obamacare system, right? And then they had to call in Google to fix the damn thing because it all crashed, and it was a piece of garbage. So I think we that's where a lot of this goes too. It's this just kind of nepotistic corruption, and yeah, I don't know. It's a sad state of affairs. I had a point and I forgot where I was going with it though.
Well, I don't know what's worse between, if it's a terrorist attack that takes down the FFA or the FAA, or a corrupted file. I think a corrupted file would be worse than a terrorist attack. Like, you put in the wrong file, and that happened. Like, we don't even need a terrorist to take us down. We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, that was what I was getting to. It's basically like planned incompetence.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that actually is worse than a terror attack, because, if that one system is that fragile, imagine the fragility of all the other systems, everything from, electric companies to, gas companies to, federal operations, all of these things. I think I saw an estimate that cybercrime is going to account for some $2 trillion is coming up here. And, a lot of that's just taking advantage of those old shitty systems and, and putting ransomware on it and, having somebody send you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that happens all the time. It doesn't make news because they don't, it's the same reason they don't broadcast every time a bank gets robbed.
Yeah.
They don't want to encourage people to do it. But, I hear of these all the time on security forums, electric companies, gas companies, medium-sized insurance companies, hospitals, all sorts of different systems that are just, they're 20 years in the past for one, but for two, like all this nepotistic, corrupted systems have just drained out any of the ability for these things to adapt and grow and function at scale in the society that we have today. And so they're just propped up to be picked off by the next criminal.
Now that you say that, who's to say that that's not exactly what happened? Who's to say there wasn't some ransomware that took down the FFA? That makes more sense. Hey, we uploaded a corrupted file. Oh, you mean you got ransomware? And you had to pay like $10 billion in Bitcoin? Is that what happened? Because that's a corrupted file.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think about. And you're right. I mean, I remember a few years ago, there was a rash of these ransomware things. It was all over the news. And now you don't hear about it at all. But it doesn't mean it stopped. It just means we stopped publicizing it.
Yep. Yeah. I still hear about them all the time on security forums. In fact, there was some claim from some group that said that they were able to hack the industrial controller. So basically everything, like, all your mining equipment, all your big machinery, all these stuff, they have these controllers that communicate with various systems in it to make it all happen. Right. So basically, like, you're, to move the bucket on a front end loader type idea.
Yeah.
There's a little control circuit, and they claim to hack that and put ransomware on that.
That's
so now yeah.
It's everywhere. Now that we're talking about it, there was an article that talked about Bank of America customers not able to use their app.
I remember that.
Right? That was pretty recent. Yeah. That's a hack. And this it all ties together. Like, there's so many cracks in the system. And maybe that is the rush to a CBDC is like, look, dude, we're getting dinged every day with ransomware. And there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do except pay them. We have to print money and pay them. That's all we can do. In a weird way, I'm almost proud of the hackers, because like they're finally doing what the 1%'s been doing to the smallest people forever. They've just been finding ways to hack the system and get paid for not doing anything. And I don't condone that behavior, but at least some goat herder somewhere, probably not a goat herder on it, is doing any hacking, but in my mind, some guys just raking $10 million from Bank of America or something like that, even though they probably come and take it back from us. Like, on some level, it brings me joy to think about small people stealing from the richest people.
Well, that's the Robin Hood story, right?
There you go.
Yeah. I was always a fan of Robin Hood too, back in the day. And, because it was kind of like the great equalizer, somebody actually standing up for the common individual. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of what's happening these days is anywhere like that. It's not the goat herder. It's not the Robin Hood. It's state-sponsored. It's state-sponsored attacks, just like things like the Stuxnet thing that the U.S. developed to infiltrate Iranian nuclear facilities. The amount of money that went into that operation and the sophistication that went into that, and ransomware is not too sophisticated. I remember when ransomware first came out, you could actually beat the ransomware by being faster than the loader for Windows. So if you hit Alt Control Delete fast enough, you could see everything that's loading on old Windows XP machines, and you could just end task on that before it actually got to do its thing, because it wasn't actually encrypting the drive at that time. It was just shutting down your ability to interact with Windows Explorer and saying that it encrypted the drive, but it never actually did. Now they're a bit more sophisticated and they do a lot of that. But yeah, even the groups who are running that stuff, they might not be state-sponsored groups, but they're organized groups of basically organized crime.
Yeah, when I think about the future, I think about the quote that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And in some ways, I would like to maybe you, me, anybody listening to this, or anybody that just is upset with the amount of corruption happening, maybe there's a way to create culture. Like maybe there's a way to reinvent the Robin Hood story and start making YouTube videos about this common person that wakes up and finds a way to steal money from the very richest people in the world and just deposit it in people's bank accounts. Or maybe there's like this maybe you could do this old Charles Bronson Deadpool thing where like, you figure some ways out to like put the ruling power on notice. Like, look, okay, we're cattle, we're nothing. How about this then? What if this sheep does this, and I think that those narratives are extremely powerful. And in fact, I heard a similar narrative applied to Andrew Tate, saying that, and I don't know a whole lot about Andrew Tate or what he's done, but I heard this guy saying yesterday that like, and on some level, I think, yeah, why not? When somebody gets so big and begins creating a following, regardless of whether you think that following is reprehensible, the fact that one person can begin to influence people means that person has the ability to sway votes. That person is becoming a real influence. And when you have someone who is becoming a real influence and that person is not controlled, that's a big problem. That's how, when we look back at history, movements get started. And if you have someone that is saying things, speaking out against the system, well, you saw what happened to MLK. You saw what happened to RFK and JFK. It's a real possibility that an Andrew Tate-like figure could arise. And if someone like that did arise and was sparking tensions, then they would be picked up. They would be moved away. But and maybe that's a bonus. Maybe seeing signs of people rising to power that don't conform to the system is a symptom that the system is getting ready to be just defiled.
I think it is a symptom of the fractures in the system.
Yeah.
Like for instance, Joe Rogan became the most important voice in the United States, superseding both CNN, Fox News, CBS, CSNBC, all combined, right? I think they would love to put a rein on him, but he's not too big of a threat because he just interviews people. He doesn't actually have a cause that's he's dedicated to. Whereas you had somebody like a Tate who decided that he had a cause. Yeah, and again, reprehensible or not, notwithstanding, um, he did get an influence that was just a whole order of magnitude above anything else that anybody else was doing.
Yeah.
Right there was a solid 6 months there where you couldn't go throughout the day without hearing that guy's name,
Yep.
whether that be from a talking head on television or a communication with a random person at the convenience store or the grocery store. Yeah, and so that type of power is something that cannot remain unchecked in the world that
Yeah.
we live in.
Yep.
It has to be checked at some level. And
Shoot. Sorry.
you could argue that those checks are good or bad. I would tend to lean more towards bad because you're essentially limiting the marketplace of ideas that can find the solutions to remove us from this calamity that we seem just dead set on heading towards.
Yeah. It's and then when you peel back the onion and you look at it from that level, like there's just so many moving parts. And but like you said, that also creates opportunity. Like you and I talking, thousands of miles apart, expressing ideas, finding ways to do what we're passionate about, all the while still going ahead and living our lives. But in some ways, I think another problem that is bad for the machine but is good for the individuals is that each individual is beginning to take ownership of their own productivity. And that's why you see a lack of productivity in the workplace, because productivity for the individual has never been higher. It's just that the corporations no
Agreed.
longer own that productivity, and so they're
Mm-hmm.
seeing flip. Like there's this weird narrative going around, like, where are all the people, where are all the people, where are all the people, like, and I'm still trying to parse it out a little bit. The numbers on jobs are like there is more jobs. Like we're in recession, but there's jobs everywhere, and like there's just this weird sort of, well, that they're part-time jobs. Well, they're these jobs. Well, they're this. Like no one really has a real answer, but it seems like more and more people are no longer working, and like I just don't. It just seems like they're not working in a way that's measured by the official machine, right? Because people are still
In
working,
part.
people are still doing stuff. So the model is changing right in front of us. And I know that you and I talk a lot about a lot of the problems, but maybe this is a way for us to shift gears and talk about what the positive benefits are. And that is people owning their own productivity, whether through its podcasts, making videos, teaming up with Chat GPT to find ways to make your life better. I see a lot of people on YouTube doing their own little family shows with their kids, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's in some ways I think what's happening is the middleman is starting to be pushed out. What do you think?
I would agree that the middleman's definitely being pushed out. I mean, we have the invention of this word side hustle into the zeitgeist,
Yeah,
right? And rewind 50, 60 years, no one would ever consider a side hustle. The
yeah,
company that you worked for 35 years has a pension for you and you're going to retire, and there's social security and all of these things. Whereas there's a realization now that it just doesn't work,
that's
right?
right.
That system is
Yep.
broken and gone by and large in most places. I know I could count on one hand the number of people who have a pension fund with work.
Yep.
There's no loyalty from the top down, so that ultimately fast forwarded a generation, there's no loyalty from the bottom up anymore. So now that loyalty has moved into the individual. Well, there's nobody else who's going to take care of me, so now I have to go off and I have to find some side hustles. I have to develop skills. I have to try new things. And I think ultimately that is a good thing for the individual.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of hiccups there. There's a lot of speed bumps, but at the end of the day, it's almost like a renaissance of small and medium businesses in this country. Even though most of the small and medium businesses got bankrupted and slurped up, the spirit for that is probably greater than it ever has been.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. And you know, I think another thing that we can do, and by we I mean people that just get up and go to work every day, that aren't millionaires or sit on a board of directors. I think we can just hijack the narrative. Like, Build Back Better is a great narrative. Like, look, okay, let's think about it like this. For the last 100 years, probably, our country, the United States, has been playing this game of Jenga. And only people like you and me, we would build the blocks. And the people on the top would take the blocks, and they would take them from the bottom of the Jenga pile and put them in their pocket. And they would take them from the bottom, and then so they have undermined the foundation of this country so bad that the tower has fell over. But no one's noticed yet, and now we're starting to notice. So if you look at it from that angle, like, everyone's, oh, it's going to collapse. Oh, actually, it's already collapsed. So you might as well start doing what you want to do, the side hustle. Like you said, that's a great point, talking about how you didn't need the side hustle before. But now, if you don't have a side hustle, then you're not going to have anything, because what you have is slowly going away. And in some ways, maybe that is the soft landing. Maybe the soft landing is, hey, it collapsed in 2008, guys. It died, 12 years ago. So you should be trying to transition into the new world economy. In fact, you guys need to start stepping up and moving into the world economy. Maybe this is the powers that be just trying to push the public, like, hey, that system died in 2008, man. It's dead. You don't live in that country anymore. It's a new world, and you have to start figuring out new things. Here's this new tool. Why don't you use this Chat GPT? We've used it for the last 30 years. It worked great for us. Now you can use it. Like, here's this new technology. We've had all this technology for 30 years. It worked for us. Now you guys try it. We've got this new stuff, so we don't need that crap anymore. So maybe that's what's been happening. And if you look at it from that angle, like, it kind of makes sense. Like, there's these new world, like 20 years ago, if your kids said they wanted to be an influencer, you'd be like, "What the hell out of here? You're not an influencer. You want to make YouTube videos? Yeah, I ain't gonna do nothing." But now there's a real possibility that, there's kids that are, 18, 19, 15, 7 years old, making $1 million a month, so it's out there. And I think if people are willing to believe in themselves, and maybe this is one of the biggest problems and epidemics that we see in the world, is that people no longer have faith in their ability to move forward in life. They no longer have the vision or the dream or the idea of, I can do it. It seems impossible, but I can do it.
It was indoctrinated out of them, right?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, our education system has, by and large, since the 70s, aimed to remove that very bit of fabric of the individual.
Yeah. The Prussian school model came in and said, you are an obedient worker. You need not dream. You need not think. Those things will be provided to you. You need not read poetry or literature or Shakespeare. That stuff we don't need poets. We need obedient workers. Now get in there.
And we didn't even need that, right?
We didn't. No.
Yeah, which is kind of wild. It went from, we quickly transitioned from the age where we needed obedient workers to all of a sudden we have computers and we have robotics and we have, massive machinery able to replicate the work of 100 people. And yeah, so I think there's something to be said about how that has played out and where we are today. Probably won't articulate it too well, but I think that, we're at a precipice where, you don't need the factory workers. Where we've talked a little bit about it before, but, like your Chat GPTs, your AIs, all of these things coming in. Yeah, they're not perfect yet. Yeah, they can't ultimately replace, a one-off human. But now you can have one human do the work of 7 humans, and you don't have to pay 6 salaries. And I think that's that next step, that next iteration that we're going to see. And I think in that, you're going to have such a displacement of people who are working menial jobs and are so indebted to the system that the rollout of these central bank digital currencies will be kind of like the stopgap to try to solve that problem. All of a sudden, because you're going to need to be giving out universal basic income in downtown Chicago. Otherwise, it's going to turn into a war zone and there'll be no businesses because everybody will loot everything and just in order to survive. And so what's the solution? Well, we give everybody $4,000 a month. How do you get that $4,000 a month? Well, you have to have this app on this phone. How do you get access to this app on this phone? Well, guess what? You have to make sure that you check all these boxes. You got your vaccination. You don't have anything negative to say about the government. And we've already seen this model roll out in China, right? So the technology already exists, and I think that's where we're going to see kind of 2025ish. I think we're going to start to see those types of situations arise.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to talk to you, because I feel like I've had all these ideas in my head, and you read all this stuff, but then you begin talking to somebody, and then you can bounce ideas off each other, and then you begin to kind of like echolocating. You can kind of see where you're at, by people kind of bouncing ideas off each other, and it makes me think that when you look at the world of money. Actually, I had a nice little experiment with Chat GPT the other day. I've been playing with it, and I
Oh, yeah.
asked Chat GPT, do you think that within the next 10 years, I'm just paraphrasing here, that we will see the idea and the concept of money change in the world? And it says it started off with like a sort of like a wash, like the idea of money is a difficult thing to define. However, I feel, because I guess prompting is everything. So I said, act as an economist, a geopolitical
Right.
strategy, and a banker. Do you think the idea of money will change? And it said, I do think that within the next 10 years, the idea of money will be somewhat redefined. It seems that the trends of peer-to-peer lending seem to be quickly, taking the place of the legacy systems. And I was like, well, there you go. I mean, if even if you just look at Chat GPT as if something that's scraping and compiling, there's so much review, there's so much literature on peer-to-peer lending. It almost seems like, it's like fighting fighting a fifth grader or something like that. Like, yeah, peer-to-peer is probably going to win. I mean, this is Mike Tyson, and, this is a fifth grader, so it's probably going to win. And when you start looking at it from that angle, I think it begins to show that argument, the idea of the monetary system failing, begins to show roots in all the other problems around the world. Whether it's our problem with the petrodollar, it's the problem with Iran, it's the problem in Ukraine, it's the problem with the financial systems, it's the problem with automation. Like, finance underpins everything, and when there's cracks in finance, everything else begins to break, because it's the blood in the system, right? It's that which provides the nutrients to the body, and if the body's not getting nutrients, the arm dies, the leg dies, things start getting cut off. And I really think that is the issue. And is it Bitcoin? Is it is there going to be a revamp of FTX, or is it going to be you get paid by your company, you get a company dollars, you can spend at the company store? I think that it's going to be all those things. Maybe not FTX, but I think it's going to be all those things. You're going to see a complete breakdown of the monetary system before we find something. Maybe we'll never have another world reserve currency. Maybe that's what happens.Maybe we don't need one. Yeah, it's bad for finance, but way better if I can find a company that buys, some sort of supplements in China that I like, and I can just pay that guy Bitcoin. He third-party researches them, and I just buy it right from him, and I'm sure those types of platforms will pop up, and you can already do it on the dark market. Like, the dark market's pretty efficient in a lot of ways. And like, it's probably why Ross is sitting in prison, because he changed everything.
Yeah, well, there's a rabbit hole there. No, I think decentralized settlement systems, kind of like Bitcoins and things like that, are definitely going to play a pivotal role in how this all unfolds out.
Yeah.
And I think the response to that is the move towards these central bank digital currencies, because then from kind of a more economic perspective, you can compete against those systems.
Yep.
If you think about our debt-based economic system in terms of how much overhead it consumes, I mean, it's massive. right? How big are bank buildings? All of the resources that go to run those, all of the people resources, all of the
Mm-hmm.
technological resources, let alone, these settlement networks and all of this, all of the politicization that's happened via those, like how cutting out Russia, for instance, and how much did that cost, right? Uh, when you start to add up the cost of running that system at a global level, it's just massive. Which is why I think it opened the door for a thing like a Bitcoin to come in at a competitive level, because now you're democratizing the cost of trust, and you're putting it into the cost of the electricity that to run the system. Uh, and so I think the central bank digital currency is kind of the International Monetary Fund's response to that. And I think that's why we've seen the push at the national level for all of these CDBCs.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that I don't. The more that we talk about it, the more I think to myself that what you're seeing is the big businesses, the politicians running in and taking the silverware before the ship goes down.
Right. I can't. I would like to say I could see it other ways, but the evidence seems to suggest that that's exactly what's happening. We're watching just the pilfering of society on a global scale.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like all of a sudden, there's these classified documents being found everywhere, but really, that's just blackmailing. Look, dude, I told you to send tanks over there. I don't care if you don't want to do it. Either you send tanks, or we start finding documents. Either you send tanks,
Mm-hmm.
or your kid goes to prison forever. He's a
Mm-hmm.
degenerate. Send the tanks. Send the planes. Otherwise, your kid's going to prison. Oh, what? You got something
Mm-hmm.
to say, Pence? Let me check out your house. Oh, what, Trump? You got something to say? Guess what I found in Mar-a-Lago? Like, you can begin to see the black hand that's just, or you know what? Maybe this is the fabled invisible hand coming in and moving the market around. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I think it's the backhand.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
funny.
think I think the whole reason that every single one of those has classified documents is because they were profiting off of them.
Yeah,
You don't just keep classified documents to keep classified documents to get your rocks off. No, you have
right,
them for a specific purpose.
right.
And just like everything else in this world, that purpose is tied to profit at some level. And so, you profit off of that, and then all of a sudden the backhand comes, and now it's saying, guess what? You're going to play ball this way. Otherwise, all that profiting you did, mm-mm.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so, and then it just takes us back to mob, like the mob mentality of like, with all these ideas about these grand sweeping visions of a a, a beacon of freedom, a city on a hill. There's just all
Mhm.
this corruption and people stealing stuff and people being trafficked, and like the song remains the same regardless of where you're living or what part of the country
Mhm.
you're in. It's almost Shakespearean in a way.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, I think, like we said, right, back then, similar shit was happening, except the only way to
Right.
get that word out and expose what was happening was through, you know, plays, was through,
Yeah.
musicians, in they would, in town criers, right? Um, Now, fast forward, instead of the plays, the musicians, and the town criers, we have the internet.
Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah, it's the rate of change that has increased to a speed that is blinding. It
It
used
is
to be someone would put on a play and they would find the actors and then they would travel around. And now it's like you just wait for the
pull out your
Twitter
phone.
files to drop. Yeah, pull out your phone. There it is. And now
Mm-hmm.
you can participate in the play. You want to be a player? Okay, let's see what you got. You want to try out?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. And I think that that's cause for celebration. The fact that you can play in the play, and you can become a player of sorts instead of being cast aside or having a lead role in a cage somewhere. Now it maybe in some ways we're moving towards a more meritocratic system. You know, like
I think
there
so.
are people. What do you think?
I think so. I think it breeds tremendous opportunity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not going to be the easy road, because the structures that exist, have a very strong uh, inclination to hold on to, the power and all of the money and all of the structures that have been entrenched for hundreds of years now. So for it to change just because we're making a couple YouTube videos, it very well could. It very well could, but the likelihood is that it's going to have a bit more friction along the path, I think.
Yeah, we are like pieces of straw on the camel's back. And so, every one of us just throw your piece of straw up there. It may seem like nothing right now, but eventually, you get
It
enough
breaks.
piece. Yeah, yeah. Eventually, that's enough straw. It'll break that back. And in some ways, it's the story of the little guy finally finding his voice, or maybe the little girl finding her voice, or yeah. When I look at it like that, I think it's a great story arc to see the world of people being oppressed, finding a voice, and starting anew. And we talk about this all the time, about the story of death and rebirth, and
The
I
hero's journey.
the hero's journey, the story of the camel to the child, and the mythological structure of it. And I, as much doom and gloom as we see, and I'm not saying that there's not going to be difficult times ahead, but I think at some point in time, when things are at their very darkest, people are going to realize that the worst is over. And I can kind of see it if I squint my eyes a little bit, I can see, like, there's so much doom and gloom, but I think maybe the worst might be behind us. Maybe living in a world, maybe we are coming out of one of the most corrupt times in human history. While it may not have been the most brutal, at least for those of us living in a rich Western country, the level of corruption, if we can agree that the corruption that we're seeing today has always happened, and we can agree that there was never as big of a spotlight on it, then we must also agree that it was happening in the dark. And it's better that you can see it, because then you can begin fixing it. And I think that that's where
Right.
we are. And that's what I mean. Like, I think the worst may be behind us. And I don't know anybody that's saying that, but I think it's true. I think you can look at it and be like, man, we didn't even know that was happening, but now we do. Now here's my piece of straw, and people are coming together. I think it was Julian Assange who said that censorship is something that we should all be praising, because it means the people that are in power applying the censorship are so weak that words will bring them down. And that's where we are. There's an incredible amount of censorship. So I think there's reason to be celebrating.
I agree there's reason to be celebrating. I'm not sure I agree that the worst is behind us. I think, I think there has to be a bit more of a collective reckoning. And there was a part of me, because I had the similar thoughts before COVID actually happened. And when COVID happened, I was like, wow, this could actually be that reckoning. Just all of the way it unfolded, where the vaccine came from, how fast it was released. There's a lot of pieces of evidence to suggest that there was some shenanigans afoot. And I thought that there was enough of global communication that, a spotlight would be, thrown into those dark places. And then we saw that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Apparently those dark places had a few tricks up their sleeve to remain in the dark. But at the same time, it also did shine a spotlight in just how entrenched things actually were and are to this day. But I think, we don't see the light in the darkness until there is that opportunity for something to shine upon it.
Yeah.
And I think we are at that point where we do have the opportunity for the light to shine into the darkness. And, these conversations, people being able to communicate in mass, I think is the beginning of that. And then probably historically looking back, they'll be like, oh, that was the turn. That was when things actually turned. In terms of like the bad things that have to happen in order for us to evolve past that, I think we still have a few pretty crazy things coming down the pike.
Yeah, it makes sense that, if the corruption, the infection doesn't leave without a fight. And
Right.
right when an animal is backed into a corner, it's going to come out swinging. And it, it,
Hmm.
it seems that, the people around the world rising up are in fact beginning to corner that scared animal that is like, I have nuclear weapons, and there's all these threats coming out. Oh, we're going to give you COVID. We're going to give you these shots. Like, in some fashion, it does seem like the machine, or the Wizard of Oz, or the man behind the curtain is becoming scared. And someone, when is scared, when they start threatening, when their voice grows louder, they start threatening more and more and more, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And like, that's what the rate of change is. It's like,
Hmm.
prior to COVID, I was just looking back at some timelines, and there were riots all over the world. There were riots in Greece,
Oh yeah.
riots in France, Brexit, Donald Trump, nationalism was breaking out everywhere. And it was like, okay, we can't control it, just shut it all down. And it did. I'm not, I don't
And
know
now it's
if,
coming back.
oh, and now it's coming back with a vengeance. Like,
Yep.
people in France, there was 1 million people on the streets because they raised the working retirement age from 62 to 64. 1 million people on the streets. There's contracts coming up left and right in the United States. There's
UK
almost a
is
civil war.
protesting
Yeah.
today. Hundreds of thousands of people.
What are
Right.
they protesting?
Working wages. So it's your nurses, it's your
Yeah.
public transport drivers, it's all of those people.
It gets us right back to finance. It gets us right back to the people and positions of authority that have, and in some ways, it's probably not just the people that are in authority now, but it's the generations that came before them that stole so
Right.
much, and,
Right.
they
And they
are,
kind of laid out a game plan, and the people who inherited that nepotistic corruption
yeah,
that inherited that is just kind of playing out of the playbook of who the people who set it up.
yeah,
Which is why I think their only solution, once things escalate to such a cacophony, is to threaten, shut it all down, because that's the only thing that they know how to do. There is no innovation, there's no imagination, there's no creativity to adjust the playbook, because it's just something they inherited.
yeah. They got all the narcissism and arrogance, but none of the creativity.
That's right. So what
I think
happens
it
when
was,
you tell somebody they're special all their life?
yeah, it's true. It's very true. I think it was Elon Musk that when he took over Twitter was saying some things along the lines of, look, you got to build stuff. You can't just give people everything. Like, you have to build things in order for society to have culture and move forward. You have to do things. You can't just
Hmm.
get things and give people money and fly around. Like, you actually have to build things and do stuff. And like, that's one of the things that, if you look at the giant multinational corporations, the only things they do to innovate is buy upcoming companies. Like, they don't do
Yeah.
anything,
Right.
So it's interesting to see. And I I do see this continued uprising of people. And if I were to look at my crystal ball and read some of the headlines from the World Economic Forum and some of the other people that are forecasting events, like, it does seem that there will be some sort of internet shutdown on the horizon. Like, that seems to be something that could be the ultimate shut it all down. I'm in the corner. I need my standing 8 count. What do you think about the internet going down? Is that possible?
Well, I think, I mean, it's technically possible, right? You cut all those international lines across the oceans and bye internet. Um, would there be the impetus to do so? I don't know. I think there is such a vastly interconnected thing in terms of resource management, the transferring of goods, that to just outright shut it down doesn't play well with how our society is structured. Hence
Right.
why you have a China and a Russia who basically have these massive firewalls, and they only allow certain bits of information, but they don't shut the whole thing down, because they still need that interoperability, that interconnectivity. So I think, but what you will probably see is much more a push towards that. So instead of having, just this broad internet, you're going to have a much more fractured internet going forward where, and we already see it today. Like, you put your location in Netflix and you're only subjected to a certain litany of shows, as opposed to somebody in France or someplace else in the world. A TikTok in the United States has a very different algorithm than a TikTok in China. And so I think we'll continue to see things move in that direction, where it'll be, depending on where you're geolocated on this planet, will have a direct reflection on what sort of information you're exposed to and able to access.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Yeah, if you have the Great Firewall in China and different propaganda in different countries and different history books in different countries, like it's an interesting experiment to see the way in which the world evolves when there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 15 different internets out there, all teaching people different. It's almost like a speciation in a way.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think, you play that out a little bit. And so it doesn't remove the ability for people to transact, but it definitely changes the narratives that are presented to people, to common people. It seems that it could be a great control mechanism, but I think, like many great control mechanisms, they seem to be very effective on the surface, but it's where they're not effective becomes the things that destroy them and take them down.
Yeah, it's like a giant Trojan horse. Like they like, look
Right.
at our shiny internet over here. Isn't this thing beautiful? It makes the city look amazing. Aren't we great? And then all of a sudden, these troops just drop out of there, and you're like, oh,
We're screwed.
And maybe the world works in mysterious ways, and maybe the original idea of the internet to democratize and free information is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, even though the people thought they had control of it. They thought they could get this thing, and that just speaks to the human condition. I can control this. I can control nature. I can do this. Like this world is littered with people who thought they could do that, and then it never works. So
right. And I think from the internet perspective, you have things, you mentioned it, like the dark net and things like this, but there's all sorts of different ways. The dark nets ran on something called onion routing, the Tor network, which is about as old school as you could imagine in terms of how innovative people have developed new systems to transmit information around this world. There's a thing called the IPFS, which is basically completely anonymous in terms of data transfer, and you can have websites out there that nobody could track the ownership of. Some cryptocurrencies run on that system. So we have multiple different options, from somebody saying, oh, you can't access the internet. There's already been a dozen options developed that says we can.
Right.
And 99% of people don't know about them, but all of a sudden you take away people's ability to access their TikTok, and they'll find out about it real fucking fast.
That's so true. Yeah, not to mention interesting ways of telecommunications. Like you can use Bluetooth, and if everybody has this Bluetooth app, it's just a booster, and you can bang it off phones until it gets to where it needs to go. It's
right. Mesh networking has come a long way. I can see there's a really cool system that it'll transmit a couple miles. So all I have to do is every couple miles have these repeaters in place, and I have my own private internet.
Yeah. In some ways, it's a fascinating experiment, and it does give me hope. It does make me thankful for living in these times while they may seem chaotic. And sometimes I think that it is just this fear campaign. Like maybe this is what, and I know we've said this before, but this is probably what freedom looks like. We're actually moving into a world that is going to be full of opportunity, and people would rather us be scared and cower in our, sometimes I think there's this grand experiment, and there's this one creator, or there's someone that says, look, let's try freedom. And this other group of people's like, they can never do it. These people are too dumb. They can't do it. And then, but there's a bargain that's struck. Let's see. Okay, let's see. But this one group is just trying to influence the people so much. Like, aren't you afraid? You're gonna go to war. You're all gonna die. Look at this disease. Like, and the other creator is just like, it's pretty amazing that this 8-year-old kid or that this one guy is better than all of your legacy media systems. There's one guy. There's 2 people right here, and they have more views than all of you. Like, on some level, the people that are running the system have to at least see it and be like, you know what? We kind of suck, man. We had all the money, we had all the talent, and we got beat by 2 people. 2. We got beat by Joe and Jamie. They took them all down.
And I think there's probably a good metaphor in there to, what is control and what happens when you try to apply control, and what, and thereby what is freedom, right? And the importance of freedom. And I think, you can fault him a lot for a lot of different things, and I don't agree with everything that was written back then, but the founding fathers had a pretty damn interesting idea when it came to, why these things should exist, right? And I think that we're continuing that experiment. Yeah, I would say that the United States experiment's probably going to end, but I think what it gives birth to will be very, very fascinating and definitely a mark in the history books.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a great spot to leave it right there. I don't think I could add on that in any shape or form, man. That's beautiful. I do. Well, as we're coming down, Ben, what are you up to? Where can people find you, and what are you excited about?
Well, always up to some sort of shenanigans. People can find me at benjamincgeorge.com. Should have some more things being published here recently, finally putting the finishing touches on, the Terra Libre project and how that's going, and, getting that to the point where actually making it a reality in the world. I have version 2 of my book coming out. I'm actually recorded a whole bunch of stuff, gonna have talks about breaking down the chapters and then going through the actual, the symbology, where the motivation came from, all of those things. So I'm excited about that.
Now, to put you on the spot a little bit, you had mentioned in a previous podcast that if people wanted to read your book and they made a commitment to read your book, that you would give them a free book. Is that something you can do for my listeners, Ben? If they go to your website and they put in an email address? There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
You contact me and you promise to review my book, even just personally to me. That's all I'd like. Free copy.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Go to benjamincgeorge.com. Get the free book, review it, talk to Benjamin C. George. It's a phenomenal book. Ben is one of my favorite people to talk to. I think if you talk to him, he'll be one of your favorite people to talk to. The book is phenomenal. And I'm looking forward to seeing the breakdown of it and continuing to learn more about the upcoming trilogy and the Terra Libre project. So thank you so much, Ben, for being here. Thank you for that offer for my listeners. And I want to say thank you to everybody who participated. Barry, John, Jimmy, all these people in the chat over here. Thank you so much for taking time to hang out with us and ask some questions. So that's what we got for today. Ladies and gentlemen,